the policy prescription that's being offered by every armchair activist and pundit is that Israel should abide by another ceasefire. And that's really just a guarantee for Hamas to carry out another atrocity. And that's not just Israel saying so. Hamas's own operatives, their senior leadership in the top echelon of the organization, says that they're going to commit October 7th over and over and over again.
Well, welcome to Keeping It Israel. My name is Jeff and I'm your host. And this is our special Battle for Truth series. And in this episode, we want to discuss how the media is reporting the war in Israel and tackle some of the most concerning falsehoods that are circulating out there right now. The Bible tells us that righteousness and justice are the foundations of God's throne. And when it comes to Israel, we want to be especially careful that we're aligned with what is right and what's just. And my guest today is a returning guest. Mike Fegelman is the Executive Director of HonestReporting Canada. He's an 8-year veteran of the Canadian journalism industry and Executive Director of HonestReporting. He has testified before parliamentary committees, has given testimony to the Standing Senate Committee for Transport and Communications to express HRC's concerns about the CBC's reporting of Israel and the Middle East. Mike's opinions and views are widely sought out by Canada's media and political elite. His work has been published in the Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, National Post, Le Devoir, Montreal Gazette, Ottawa Citizen, and many more. And so, Mike, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Jeff.
Well, it's truly our pleasure. And I want to start here because, the last time that we connected and we're talking on the podcast was quite some time ago. We were talking about the concerns that both of us have about growing anti-Semitism in the world and the things that were sort of pointing to that. And of course, the inaccurate reporting of much of what goes on in the land of Israel as it pertains to, the Palestinians and the Gaza conflict. But since the time that you and I spoke, much has transpired. And so today we're going to have an awful lot to talk about, but starting with the horrific and atrocious attack of October 7th, just give us a snapshot of your opinion, how the media has been doing at reporting what is going on in Israel and Gaza.
I'm going to use two very short words: journalistic malpractice. That basically sums up what we have witnessed, whether on print, broadcast, electronic, social media, Canada International. Israel's security concerns consistently overlooked. Israel depicted as the aggressor, Israel depicted as a warmonger committing crimes against humanity, war crimes, you name it. The latest iteration of that, as you've probably heard, the accusation of genocide leveled by South Africa at the International Court of Justice. There is, it defies credulity on the basis of what's really transpiring. And I think, it's never been more difficult to separate fact from fiction. And right now, and this is pretty much since time immemorial, we're seeing blood libels, we're seeing some of the most odious allegations which do not stand up to scrutiny, which don't conform to veracity, which ultimately buttress and support the efforts of the genocidal Hamas terrorist group. And I'm sure a lot of your viewers and listeners are well aware of what transpired on October the 7th. Just an odious, just deplorable atrocity of pretty much 1,400 Israeli citizens and some foreign nationals, the capture and kidnapping 240 hostages, men, women, children, the elderly, the infirmed, many of whom are still being held in Gaza. That story, that narrative, it just doesn't even resonate anymore. It's as if it didn't even happen. And the depiction by many journalists is that, quite frankly, Israel is facing a ghost army, right? Like I can't remember the last time I saw a TV segment where I actually saw a Hamas terrorist, or it's as if on the basis of that sort of jaundiced news coverage, it depicts Israel as targeting a population and not combatants. Yeah. And so it's a real miscarriage of justice. And I think it's a real indictment on the journalism industry per se.
Can we go back just to the beginning? Because there was this one story I've talked to many people about it, but I haven't had a chance to talk to you about it. There was some reporting that indicated that media were not only sort of early to the jump on this story, but actually complicit. Tell me a little bit about some of that.
Well, I think it's just interesting that there was at the time of the massacre that there was a lot of stringers and Palestinian photojournalists who were at different areas of inside Israel, meaning that they crossed a border and took footage of different massacres that were taking place, footage of hostages being brought back into Israel. There is the question that's being asked. Did
Hmm.
some of these people have advance notice? And some news outlets, on the basis of really compromising images that have come across of, of these freelancers who either had it shown with photos with praising Hamas terrorists, whether they're compromised. So, I think again, another indictment of the media. I'm not suggesting that they were given advance notice. It could have happened, but that it conforms to the need for veracity. But it
Hmm.
is interesting that, and again, for your viewers' edification, the attack happened in the early hours of the morning, right?
Yeah.
On the frontier between Israel and Gaza. I mean, like, how is it? Did it just happen that many of these photographers were so well positioned at this one area at this one particular day and time? Right? Like, these are questions that deserve to be answered.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, and without indictment, I would say that these are questions that are almost rhetorical. It just doesn't seem possible that there was no advance notice, certainly on the part of these freelancers. I'm sure. I'm not saying that that Reuters or AP or whoever sort of commissioned them or knew that this was coming from them or whatever. I'm not saying that, but it just seems way too coincidental. The not just the footage they got, but the kind of footage they got, the very initial parts of the attack, and I did want to just kind of address that and not gloss over it before we moved on. But uh, tell me, what are the most outstanding misconceptions, false claims about the war circulating right now in our
Oh,
Western media?
yeah, I mean, like, a lot of people want to talk about October 7th. I actually want to talk about October 6th. What happened the day before? There was a de facto quote unquote ceasefire. So, like, the prevailing narrative right now in the world is a return to the ceasefire, but we have to look at how things came to a fore. This
Hmm.
is Hamas violating a ceasefire, one of many violations, and the policy prescription that's being offered by every armchair activist and pundit is that Israel should abide by another ceasefire. And that's really just a guarantee for Hamas to carry out another atrocity. And that's not just Israel saying so. Hamas's own operatives, their senior leadership in the top echelon of the organization, says that they're going to commit October 7th over and over and over again. So Israel's statement is as follows, and its rationale for what for its military efforts in Gaza is pretty much the three Ds: to degrade Hamas's military capabilities, hopefully to destroy it. But that's probably something that may be impossible on the relevancy of political ideology. Also, the fact that
Hmm.
Hamas is a stronghold in areas of Judea and Samaria in the West Bank, but also to really deny Hamas the ability to carry out future attacks. So the policy of deterrence that has to happen. And again, for your viewers' edification, they need to know that this was the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, right? Since the
Right.
Second World War. This wasn't just a small attack. There were thousands upon thousands of terrorists who raped, pillaged, and murdered innocents in the most grotesque attacks that you can even imagine. As
Yeah.
somebody who has watched the 48 minutes of Hamas's GoPro footage, sort of
Oh.
uh, camera footage of their atrocities, right? Like, so back in yesteryear in the Holocaust, the Nazis didn't they really tried to hide their crimes against humanity. Hamas, on the other hand, live streams it and records it for posterity. They're very proud of it.
Right.
And in that footage, you see summary executions. There's documentation of people being burnt alive. There's testimony of people being mutilated, some of the worst things. So imagine you're an Israeli living on the border with Gaza, knowing that that could repeat again. And then also knowing, because now in recent days, we're seeing an escalation on Israel's northern border with Hezbollah, who pledges pretty much the same thing, that
Mhm.
that can happen. And what most people don't realize, the media are certainly not covering, is that Israel has had to displace its northern population, about 80,000 Israelis, from the north because of the fact that they're within rocket range of Hezbollah's about 150,000 rockets, many of them that are precision guided. So this is, and Israel is basically at a standstill. I mean, they're a nation that is paralyzed. They're a nation that is traumatized, and I think you've got about 350,000 Israelis, reservists who are serving. There's been a sort of a staged pullback from the northern elements of the Gaza Strip, and they're doing more precision targeting exclusively of terror operatives. But there's a media depiction that Israel's just laying siege to the area, that it's not providing humanitarian aid, which is just a bold falsehood. And it's conforming with every international law that exists, and does everything in its power to safeguard innocent life. But how do you deal with a situation when your adversary situates itself amongst a civilian population? It's an
Yeah.
impossibility.
Yeah, it certainly is challenging. And just so our listeners and our viewers fully understand, talk to us a bit about Hamas. Why is it so important that Israel does away with them as a neighboring threat in this instance?
Yeah, so I mean, I could certainly explain that away from the Israeli security posture, which is easy, right? You've got a genocidal organization funded by the Iranian regime that, on top of shooting thousands of rockets, is really trying to do everything in its power to commit a genocide. But I would even argue that what Israel is doing is ultimately for the benefit of the Palestinian people, right? This is
100%.
Hamas that has, I think they have siphoned billions of dollars worth of aid, international aid dollars that should go towards the betterment of the Palestinian people for necessary institution building, healthcare, education, you name it, government apparatus. But Hamas, it's a kleptocracy, an autocracy, a theocracy. It's doing everything in its power, one, for corruption purposes, right? You've got the leaders who, mind you, do not live in Gaza. They live in exile in Qatar, Ismail Haniyeh and Khalid Mashal, billionaires, multiple billionaires, taking tax levies from the Palestinian people, and Israel is going in there again. If Israel wanted to, it could lay siege to the area. It could drop bombs, but instead it's putting its own soldiers at risk. And to back to the claim of genocide by South Africa, if Israel were committing genocide, you would think that they would also be targeting Palestinians in the West Bank or Arab Israelis in Israel, but they're
Exactly.
not. But why aren't they? Because they have every desire to extend a hand outstretched in peace for their Palestinian brethren. And there's nothing any Israeli would want more than the status quo to be peace. But this is a war that Israel didn't ask for. It's a war that Israel doesn't want, but it's a war that Israel has no choice but to win.
Yeah. No, all of those things I totally 100% agree with. I was actually just in a conversation today with someone about that very thing. If genocide is their want and their intention, why? Why are there, 2 million Arab Israelis who hold citizenship and have rights? And why can Arabs serve in the Knesset? And why is there an Arab Supreme Court justice? Like what if they were really truly after genocide? It would be super easy for them to start right within Israel proper. That's not what they're about. And you and I know that. People, though, are so crazy. I think about Ben Shapiro's comment. He said that the Hamas and they will tell you that they're going to do October 7th over and over again. They'll tell you that they want Israel annihilated. They'll tell you all of those things because they know you won't believe them. It's like we feel like it's so ridiculous that it couldn't be true, right?
Right. Well, and I hear that often said cavalierly by a lot of journalists, that it's just bluster and rhetoric, and even in the world of social media, saber rattling. But we know
Yeah.
it's not.
No.
right? The obviously there was serious security deficiencies on Israel's part on the basis that this infiltration happened. But we know that if given the opportunity, they will commit this attack over and over again.
Hmm.
And imagine this happened in Canada. Imagine we had terrorists in Michigan, who thousands of whom came across our border. We would expect our political echelon, our political leadership, to do everything in its power to stop that threat. Imagine they took, men, women, and children hostages. We would demand that they undertook every possible effort to safeguard and return
Hmm.
our people. And I think the world is cavalier when they call for a ceasefire. They don't condition that on the return of the hostages. And quite frankly, when they say that Israel should commit a ceasefire, why are they not calling for Hamas to disarm, disband, and return the hostages? Why is that not
Right.
the most important policy prescription? The war could be over tomorrow, if they return the hostages, if Hamas demilitarized Gaza and got out. And
Right.
I think the world is really acting as Hamas's advocates, whether consciously or subconsciously, whether they don't even realize it or not. It's a really, honestly, it's a tragedy, and we're about a little over 3.5 months into this conflict, and it doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon.
Hmm. Wow. Well, on that note, we're seeing this explosion of um, pro-Palestinian support, and therefore also an explosion of anti-Semitism in the world. I think the recent number I heard is probably higher now, is that anti-Semitism has gone up like 400% in North America, and I think that none of this stuff really makes sense. Why is there such a swing? There was like sympathy for Israel for about the first week after October 7th, and then all of a sudden, everything swung the other direction. And there's all these accusations. For example, do you think that Israel is responding disproportionately and committing war crimes? Are the majority of Gazans innocent, in your opinion? These kinds of things are things that people they don't know because they don't know. You
Yeah,
know?
well, I mean, look, part of the hallmark of the definition of anti-Semitism includes, and this is according to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of Jew hatred, that when you blame Jews for the actions of the state of Israel, that is anti-Jewish discrimination. It just is. So when
Hmm.
we have in Toronto, where we have an area called, I think it's an overpass between Wilson Avenue and I think it's Avenue Road, which is a heavily populated Jewish area. But when you have pro-Palestinian demonstrators there that are specifically targeting Jewish neighborhoods, that's anti-Semitism, right? Like, if you're going to protest, and by the way, I'm all for the right to protest peacefully with civil discourse. Do it at the
Yeah.
Israeli consulate. Do it at government buildings, perhaps. Do it with decorum. So
Hmm.
location aside, though, Jeff, I mean, what we're really encountering at all of these kind of protests, or many at least, is real Jew hatred, where you have is Benjamin Netanyahu depicted as Adolf Hitler. You have genocidal chants calling for the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. I mean,
Yeah.
this is what's transpiring, and I think people are confusing activism and anarchy, and they're two different things. When you have these demonstrators that are also engaging in graffiti and vandalism, and Jewish establishments are being attacked. Whether it's in Toronto, Montreal, or Winnipeg, we've had shootings. We have bomb threats constantly. Jews are being harassed at. There's a synagogue in Thornhill in Ontario called Chabad Flamingo. Jews a couple of days ago reported that they were attacked by a number of
Hmm.
anti-Israel demonstrators who spat on them, right? This is a daily occurrence. And though Jews comprise, I believe it's about 2 or less than 2% of Canada's population, we're on the receiving end of a gross majority of all hate crimes. So, the fact that a conflict overseas reverberates locally and Jews are attacked, that's a real travesty. And I think in this world, what our community is looking for is
Hmm.
consequences for this behavior, for there to be real kind of deterrence from the political leaders who say, look, this is not okay. And we're seeing not just a normalization of anti-Semitism, but a weaponization, right? It's taking hold in
Yeah.
our streets. And, the pulse of our community, if I can speak, not that it's monolithic, but there's a real fear that has set in, rightfully so, right? I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people where they'll say, I'm fearful of going to a rally in support of Israel and our hostages because I might get lynched, or wearing a kippah or a Star of David, something
Mhm.
of that nature.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I referenced this, I think, in another interview that I did, but we have a Reformed Jewish synagogue here in Barrie in the South End, and there's a home not too far from where I live in my neighborhood that all the years I've lived here had a large steel, welded menorah out in their front lawn. They used to light it up every year over Hanukkah, and I was so sad. I was driving by, a little before um, Christmas season, before the Hanukkah season, and I noticed that they had taken it down. And I just thought to myself, why? Why do we have to live in fear like this? And it's just, um, this is, I know a lot of people use this phrase, but this is not my Canada. This is not certainly representative of my values and morals, and I believe many others. But you talked about Jew hatred, and I think this is the underlying thing. We talked about anti-Semitism months ago, and the fact that it was real, and the fact that we needed to be aware of it and call it out and challenge it. Well, now it's so in your face. It's like all of that was under the surface. People have been emboldened now because of this conflict, and it's just brought people out of the woodwork. How do you feel like we're handling this here in the West, in your opinion? Are we handling these protests well? How's policing doing? Like, should we be more concerned about this?
I think we should. Well, I'll speak for Toronto, for that's where I'm situated right now. Um, what I will say is that the Toronto police presence to safeguard our communities has been exceptional, and there is an incredible bolstered effort where you have different command centers that are situated across what we call our Bathurst corridor, which is traditionally where a lot of the Jewish community lives, that are doing whatever they can. The resources are being deployed to sort of counter threat. There's no question. But as it
Mhm.
relates to some of these demonstrations, I'm sorry, but when you have images of police giving the demonstrators coffee, even though they may not have bought it, but had given it to them, that in terms of optics, it looks like there is a tacit support, which the police chief did rebuke and condemn. But to the bigger point, when major arteries of our city are being blocked in
Yeah.
Jewish community areas by protesters without consequence, that's a real problem. Just to give you an example, in New York, I believe it was 2 days ago, the authorities there arrested, I think, 250 of these protesters who were blocking major thoroughways to Brooklyn because that's a violation of the law. So,
Right.
in a number of respects, it's not that the laws on the books don't exist. It's that maybe there's either not a political will or efforts to actually enforce certain laws. In other
Mm.
areas, look, I do think that there has to be amendments to certain laws. For example, to my understanding, if you were to walk the streets of Barrie or Edmonton with a Hamas flag, I don't believe that's actually against the law. Correct me if I'm wrong. To
Yeah. I don't know.
So it's shocking, right?
Yeah.
And you would think that to fly the flag of a terrorist organization would be, that Canada, we have something called the Canada Gazette, which is our official listing of proscribed groups, would consider to be a violation of the criminal code. I actually don't think it
Hmm.
is. Even and then
Wow.
you get to the verbal rhetoric, right? So we know that a proclamation calling for the genocide of Jews by way of from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, or calling for an intifada. We know that those are insightful words, like they are, but there is no
Hmm.
consequence for them. So I'm a
Wow.
core free speech advocate, but we also have to draw the lines. Like what is fundamentally causing the fanning of flames of hatred? In Montreal, there was a hate preacher who, in front an audience of several hundred people, called for effective jihad against the Israeli people, right? And how does that reverberate back to the local Montreal Jewish community? So there has to be bolstered hate crimes investigations, more resources allocated, and real consequences. I think precedents need to be set.
Good thoughts. You mentioned the term political will, and so I'm going to go there. How about at the sort of the highest echelons of our government? What sort of either applause or disappointment are you experiencing over how Canada is responding to what's going on?
Speaking about just as it relates to our official government on a federal level, I think that supporters of Israel, the Jewish community, is really quite appalled that the government has, endorsed the idea of a ceasefire, which Israel just sees as again another genocide, and that is really calling into question a lot of Israel's actions. So
Hmm.
when the conflict really was at its infancy a couple months ago, when there was a rocket that was fired that landed in the lot of a Palestinian hospital called Al Alhia, and the prime minister came out with a statement of condemnation, though not overtly critical of Israel, but tacitly did. And then
Yeah.
it turns out, well, look, it wasn't actually the Israelis; it was an errant Islamic Jihad rocket that was fired that killed, instead of what was told 500 people, was dozens of innocent civilians, which is a tragedy. But the culprit was actually the terror organizations. So there is, unfortunately, a presumption of Israeli guilt and not giving the benefit of the doubt. And that's a real problem that we're having at the political level and across a lot of the different parties. You would think you
Hmm.
would have lockstep support. To give an example, Tony Blinken, who's the Secretary of State of the U.S., I believe he's still in Israel. He was in Tel Aviv, and he put out a statement condemning the allegations of genocide. That they're without merit. I haven't seen a similar statement from Melanie Joly, our Minister of Foreign Affairs. You would think that that would
Yeah.
come, right? But
Right.
haven't seen that. Jews, the victims of a Holocaust, who were on the receiving end of an attempt at another Holocaust by Hamas. Again, they had a goal that this wasn't. They weren't going to retreat. They were hoping to get to Tel Aviv. And who knows if maybe there was an even bigger goal that Hezbollah was going to join in. You never know.
Hmm.
So Israel fended off a genocide and is being leveled with genocide. It is a logical fallacy. It's just it defies logic.
Well, Mike, you already mentioned the war could end tomorrow if hostages were released and Hamas laid down their weapons and demilitarized. We know that that's true. Um, but what would happen? Sorry, this is not in my list here of things to say, but what would happen if Israel pulled back and laid down their arms? What would happen then?
Be the end of Israel.
Yeah,
It'd be the end of
yeah.
Israel. We know that fundamentally,
Hmm.
right? War could be over tomorrow if Hamas lay down their arms, but Israel has no choice. They
Yeah,
cannot have a lack of a security posture. The other thing people need to know is Israel was never occupying Gaza, right? Like
right.
that's the claim. Israel vacated in 2005, and it was situated in Israel proper, where there was an infiltration. That infiltration is an act of war. And it's a little bit different because Gaza is not a country; it's a terror statelet. So the laws of armed conflict are a little bit different because it is a terror regime, mind you.
Mm,
It's a terror regime that the Palestinian people in Gaza voted in, right, in a number of years ago, for I think 17 years, and then really further entrench themselves with a coup d'etat. But this is really what Israel is facing. So,
yeah.
look, Israel would want everything in its power to not have to, have young, 18-year-old soldiers who are now patrolling Khan Yunis and a number of the different camps that exist in the Gaza Strip. Nobody wants to be there. And in fact, you're also seeing Israel's economy is really in a tailspin because you have tons of people who are not working, not contributing to the economy.
Right.
Um, and then not even talking about the real PTSD and trauma of the Israeli psyche. Now they're an incredibly resilient people. This is, they're used to this kind of constant terror, but never at this kind of pace, never at this level.
Yeah, yeah. Sadly resilient out of necessity,
Yeah.
which has happened to them over decades. But well, Mike, I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us today. And I'm going to quote the Bible right now. Isaiah 62, 6 and 7 says that God says, "I posted watchmen on your walls, Jerusalem. They will never be silent day or night. You who call on the Lord, give yourselves no rest and give him no rest until he establishes Jerusalem and makes her the praise of the earth." And this is a verse that I share often when I visit church groups and talk to Christians about the fact that if they are people who pray, God has something for them to do in regard to being defenders of and supporters of Israel. But beyond praying right now, what can Christians here in Canada and around the world be doing to ensure that Jerusalem and Israel truly come into their own as the praise of the earth that God is looking for? How can we truly be Israel's watchmen right now?
Oh, it's a great question. And there's so many things everyone can do. I would say, first off, look internally, each person, and say, okay, where is my subject matter of expertise? Where are my passions? How can I accelerate Israel's interests? Whether that's, whether I'm savvy in social media and putting out content, whether that's sending letters and petitions to government stakeholders, lobbying for different policy prescriptions, whether that's fundraising for important causes in Israel. I think the biggest thing that I'm trying to encourage is people to not be feckless, to get skin in the game, right?
Mhm.
Don't
Yeah,
be armchair activists. That every single individual cannot, I guess, pass the buck of responsibility, but has to roll up their sleeves and get very involved because it's all hands on deck. I mean, this is a situation that where Israel needs allies around the world to support it. And
yeah,
it knows it's outnumbered. There's no question, but the principles are on its side, and this is a real moral cause that we have
mhm,
to fight for, and that we cannot get into a world of appeasement, which is really that's what we're facing right now.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you, Mike. And if people want to know more about Honest Reporting Canada, where can they find out more about you and the work that you do?
Thank you, Jeff. I'd encourage everybody to go to our website first, www.honestreporting.ca. You can receive any of our content. We're entirely free. We put out a daily alert mobilizing Canadians to take action against media bias. And if there's any problematic content you come across that you think we should take action, or that you'd like support in taking action yourselves, that's what we're here for.
Amazing. Well, Mike, thanks again for your time. Great to have you back on the podcast, and I hope we talk to you again soon.
Anytime. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks for watching. You can listen to this entire podcast on your favorite audio podcast platform. Find the link below. And while you're at it, don't forget to click subscribe and follow us on Facebook so you can stay connected to First Century Foundations.